Reverend Professor, well, the Professor Reverend will say again what he just said, that a religion is not God-made but man-made, then I'm done. The man made God in his own image. That's why there are so many gods. That's why the gods often say such stupid and wicked things. That's why they fight with each other. Religion is what you would expect if it was created by primates who are half a chromosome away from a chimpanzee. And it's precisely the same promise as Osama bin Laden gives to his murderers. Believe with me and you go to paradise and you'll be fine. Nauseating garbage of this kind.
Each of you is here tonight because of what you believe. That's why you were invited to the forum to address the audience. And I'm wondering, what is at stake for you personally in your beliefs?
Even faced with the near sublime geniality of comrades Kushner and Gomes, I'd have to say, at the risk of seeming too solemn and maybe too severe, that for me it's become, especially over the last 20 years or so, since first the fatwa against Salman Rushdie that extended violent Islamic religious theocratic terrorism right into the heart of our own culture, but then the subsequent events that no one has any difficulty picturing, that for me it's become a survival question. I think the parties of God really sincerely intend the destruction of everything I know of and care about that's worth defending. And I, in turn, sincerely wish, hope to defeat them. And I make no sectarian exemption for this. The messianic Jewish settlers on the West Bank who think that by stealing other people's property they can bring on the Messiah are my foe. So are the people in the Muslim Brotherhood, sometimes disguised as Hamas, who claim in that name to be their enemy. So is the appalling idea, very now imminent, that our worst nightmare is about to occur, that an apocalyptic regime, an apocalyptic theocracy, in this case in Persia, will acquire apocalyptic weaponry, something we've all been dreading for a long time. It's about to be upon us. And of course the attempt to stultify American children and American culture by teaching pseudoscience and nonsense in the schools as we try and celebrate the anniversaries of Darwin and Lincoln. All of this to me is the same fight. And I've decided to devote my life to making sure that reason and secularism and their cognates, democracy and civilization, are not destroyed in this way, that the victory goes instead to our side. Voila.
You know, Connie, I would hope that one of the, unspoken ground rules for this evening's discussion was that we don't compare the worst of one side with the best of another. Let's take religion and skepticism at their best, or let's take religion and skepticism at their worst, but not compare the sins of religion with the virtues of secularism or the other way around. What's at stake? What's at stake for me? Bedrock, I guess, is the issue of whether my life has any transcendent meaning. Does it make a difference at some significant level whether I lie or tell the truth? Does it make a difference whether I'm faithful to my marriage vows or I stray from my marriage vows? Does it make a difference if I conduct myself honestly or if I try and cheat? Now, I will be the first to admit that there are people who pass themselves off as religious, and they commit adultery, and they cheat their neighbors, and they conduct elaborate Ponzi schemes, and they are an embarrassment to anyone who affirms religion. But you don't judge any idea or any system by its worst exemplars. You judge it by what is the capacity to do for people who want it at their best.
I am a confessed Christian, and that means that for me it is impossible to be religious in general. One is always religious in particular. Now, I'm a Christian because that's the world into which I was born. But I'm also a Christian because I have been intrigued by what I call the experiment of the gospel. That is to say, no one's ever really tried it. And it would be interesting to see what would life be like if people really did try it. So my whole commitment as a Christian has been to try to translate the great and high theory of our faith into practical living experience. I can't remember who it was, somebody out there will doubtless tell me, who said, religion is not an experiment that has been tried and found wanting. It's an experience that has been wanted and never really tried. And my job is to try it, and to try to persuade other people to try it, to be mindful of our weaknesses and our excesses, which we confess every Sunday, and also to be mindful of the much higher vision without which I wouldn't dare contemplate this world. So my stake is high, but it's also very particular. If it were not, I'd find another way to make a living, of which there are many, and many far easier than this one.
Mr. Hitchens, I suspect you have a response.
I'm sorry, I'll just have to say that I think anyone who applauded either of the foregoing remarks is incredibly easily pleased as well as incredibly easily amused. Is it not the case that we are not here tonight to discuss how good a humanist can you be? How does Judaism or Christianity help you to be a good husband or father or citizen? The claims of religion are not that. The question is this, and I certainly don't claim to be a better citizen, husband, father, or even debater than anyone else on the basis of my beliefs. But isn't it the case that religion says that that's where morals come from in the first place? My challenge is the following. Not just, can you name me, ladies and gentlemen, brothers, sisters, comrades and friends, I've done this in front of many audiences now, there's a prize for the person who can do it. Name me an ethical statement or an ethical or moral action made by a believer that couldn't be made or performed by a non-believer. You have time to think about it. Email it to me if you like. You have all the time in the world. No one's been able to do it yet. There is a prize, and I'll tell you later, what, perhaps, if you're good, what it will be. But no one's put their hands up, have they? They never do.
May I try one question?
You may, by all means, Rabbi, but there's a corollary question before I stop. Name me a wicked action performed or recommended, or an evil thing said by a believer that is said because of their belief only, that a secularist would not be able to do. And everyone has immediately thought of something. Every one of you knows. The genital mutilation community, entirely theocratic. The suicide murder community, almost entirely theocratic. The shall we terrify children by telling them about hell as a consequence of masturbation community is entirely theocratic. The child abuse community in general, more or less, it slightly irritates me to have to appear with spokesmen for great religions who always act as if they've got absolutely nothing to apologize for, when the reverse is the case.
Morality does not depend on religion. Research in psychology shows that empathy and fairness appear early in human development, even in children who haven't been taught any religion. Evolutionary biology explains this too. Cooperation helped humans survive, so moral instincts developed naturally. Across countries, data also shows that highly secular societies like Sweden, Denmark, and Japan have low crime rates and high social trust. That weakens the idea that belief in God is required for people to act morally. At the same time, religious texts contain moral commands that most people today reject. In Deuteronomy 21:18-21, a disobedient child could be executed. In Leviticus 25:44-46, slavery is permitted. These aren't abstract ideas. They show that morality in Scripture reflects the time it was written, not a perfect standard.
Rabbi?
Well, for one thing, I think religion, any sensible religion, has a lot to apologize for and acknowledges it. And let's not pretend they don't. To judge religion in the year 2009 on the basis of what was said 3,000 years ago is a little bit like condemning today's medicine because of the terrible things that doctors did to patients in the Middle Ages.
Is it?
You want something which you can get from religion you can't get elsewhere? What about the sense of a person troubled by the fact that he keeps doing things he doesn't want to do and needs to feel cleansed and needs to feel that there is a possibility of his changing himself? which is why the 12-step programs are so remarkably effective, because they say, you keep doing it yourself, you're not going to climb out of it, you've got to turn to that higher power. I don't see anybody doing that without some sort of what I would call a spiritual religious source.
I've spent a great deal of time in the religious tradition out of which I come, confessing my sins. Some might think that's a morbid preoccupation. It is not. One of those sins is the sins of arrogance, thinking that we know everything. Another is the sin of ignorance, not knowing that we don't know anything. Which is why at the center of most responsible liturgies is a confession which acknowledges that religion is a human construct, not a divine construct. And as human beings, flawed as we are, we're going to construct religions which will aspire to great things, but which will, in some level, be incapable of those great things, because it depends on us. Fallible, frail, difficult human beings. I need the sense of something that transcends my little world and my little religious construction and my little conviction, that will press me onward, that will press me upward, that will give me something worth aiming at. And I think, at the very best, religion is an aspiration, not an achievement. And that's why I do what I do. I aspire.
I couldn't, if the Reverend Professor, well, the Professor Reverend will say again what he just said, that a religion is not God-made but man-made, then I'm done.
Good.
Well then, let's go drink.
Man made God in his own image. That's why there are so many gods. That's why the gods often say such stupid and wicked things. That's why they fight with each other. Religion is what you would expect if it was created by primates who are half a chromosome away from a chimpanzee, which we now know it to be. So, voila, I rest my case.
Professor Gomes, is he obviously toying with your premise? I mean, how would you respond to what he just said?
I'd say we've enjoyed your company this evening. I hope we meet again.
Okay.
No, it seems to
I did ask for that. I must. Hello, I must be going.
It does seem to me, from my lifelong study of religion, that if this is in fact dropped down from heaven in some deus ex machina, or that God is the dictator, the author of everything that's in the Bible, he needs a good editor. This isn't the way it is. These are human aspirations, an attempt for human beings to acquire something grander and more noble than we ourselves are. The hint of God, it seems to me, is not so much God winking at us from on high. It's our trying to catch a glimpse of what, for lack of a better word, we will call the divine. And it is that aspiration to which I commit my life, and those who have a better vision of it than I do, saints and seers and holy people, I honor. But I want us always, especially religious people, to remember that what we are doing on this side of full and perfect knowledge is always going to be imperfect and incomplete. And religious people, I should know, I live with them. Religious people are among the most imperfect and incomplete people that I know.
Rabbi?
Excuse me.
Sure.
Peter, I wonder if there's a middle ground here where we could say that religion originates with God, and when human beings try to write it down and institutionalize it, it always falls short of the perfection of the original revelation. That the Israelites came to Sinai and met God and tried to write down what that encounter meant to them. And inevitably, I think we've all experience, if you have this wonderful thing happen to you, you try to tell a friend about it, you will never capture the wonderfulness of it in your words. That's what happened at Sinai. They tried to write it down in what became the Bible, and it is an imperfect, flawed, incomplete record of what I think was a transcendent experience.
Now, Bertrand Russell was asked once, well, what if you die, check out, and you're confronted with your maker or St. Peter or whoever it is, and you have to give an account of your unbelief? And he said, in that event, I should say, "Oh Lord, you did not give us enough evidence." Now, I feel I've spent a lot of my life trying to improve on that, but I'm not going to do that now. I want to say, with the Reverend Professor Gomes, what I feel is he isn't giving me enough to disagree with or disagree about. I mean, of course, by all means, I think one of the great cultural projects that we all...
They just admitted religion is man-made, and that destroys the claim that it comes from a perfect God. If a divine message were real, it wouldn't come out flawed, contradictory, and dependent on human interpretation. The Bible shows exactly that problem: different accounts, edits, and moral rules that shift over time. The higher power argument doesn't prove anything supernatural. Recovery programs work because of structure, accountability, and community. Those are psychological factors, not evidence of God. You can get the same results without belief. And look at the pattern. Thousands of religions, each claiming truth, each shaped by culture and geography. That's what you expect from human creation. Even in the Bible, God's message reflects ancient societies: laws about slavery in Exodus 21, harsh punishments, tribal control.
What we must involve ourselves in and agree to undertake now is, given that most of us at least half suspect that the heavens are empty, what are we to do in the absence of the supernatural about, or even the spiritual, but say with the numinous, or if you want, the spiritual, the feeling that there's more to life than just the banal, the feeling that is given to us by love or by music or by architecture. To be an atheist is not to say that these things are nothing or count for nothing. Say, how shall we handle the numinous in the event that there isn't a supernatural? I would give it as an example. I wrote a short book about the Parthenon, still one of the great buildings of civilization and still with the great power to stir. I don't believe in the cult of Pallas Athena. I don't believe in Athenian imperialism. I don't believe in the Panathenaic procession. I don't believe in the Eleusinian mysteries. But I couldn't be without that building. I couldn't. If it was destroyed, it would be worse for me than the destruction of, say, Chartres or the great mosque at Damascus.
Why?
It just would. There's something about the symmetry of Hellenistic architecture and what went with it that means an enormous amount to me, and that I couldn't quantify, and I don't feel I have to. Those who are here would either know what I meant or wouldn't. And it's just as when Francis Collins, who's become a friend of mine, I hope I'm not banging on too much about this, but I think we've come to a certain point, he's a believing Christian. He also ran the Human Genome Project. He says that he was hiking one day in the uplands of, I think, Washington State, and he came across a frozen waterfall that had frozen in 3 streams, like a trinity. And he said at that moment, he fell to his knees and accepted Jesus Christ as his personal savior. Now, I don't respond to nature like that. And my hikes are much less demanding, I freely admit. And also, what if there'd been 4 streams or only 2, and there wasn't a trinity? All this is at hazard to me. And I'm with William James. The varieties of religious experience, they're subjective, they're real to the people they happen to. But you can't tell me because you've seen the Virgin Mary appear to you that I must accept the doctrine of the virgin birth. And what we are not talking about here, because we're also liberal and grown up and tolerant and broad-minded, is what the real problem is, which is that there are all around the world and in our own society people who believe that their own membership of a party of God gives them the right to tell me what to do. And I mustn't be the only person on this stage tonight who emphasizes that fact.
Professor Gomes, I wonder what you make of when Mr. Hitchens started a little bit ago. He basically was saying that perhaps you've been too polite, and that in making your argument, you've given him not enough to disagree with yet. How would you respond to that? Because I suspect you have a little more.
I wasn't aware that it was my job to feed red meat to Mr. Hitchens.
He won't rise.
He had to get it on his own.
He won't rise.
But I'm going to take the opportunity that you have given me, not to answer your question, but to say something else.
All right.
I was at Harvard just at the point where the great theologian Paul Tillich died. He was in Chicago. And there was this wonderful account that somehow a telegram was dispatched to Karl Barth in Basel that the great theologian Tillich had died. And apparently Barth's reply was, now he knows. Now, there's a great deal that I do not know about the substance of my faith. I don't know, I find it impossible to explain the Trinity, and I find it very difficult to believe the explanations that have been offered, but it's part of the furnishings of the household in which I have chosen to live. And I am curious, eager, even anxious to find out. So I don't want to reject it because somehow it doesn't square with my little...
Don't be in a hurry to emulate Professor Tillich.
Oh, I'm not.
Promise.
Except that now
Promise
he
you
knows.
won't do that.
Except that now he knows. I can't reject what I can't square with my little brain. I belong to a community of people who, in many ways, having less opportunity than I, or who might in some cases even know less than I, have nevertheless committed themselves to a great ideal and should feel wicked when they live less than that ideal. I aspire to that, which is why, I could leave the Christian church. I could say phooey on it. A lot of silly people, a lot of silly beliefs, a lot of bad behavior, but I'm not going because I haven't found anything better to embrace my soul, my imagination, or my mind. So there I am.
Let's step back a bit. Let's get away from the titles, the positions we hold. Something that all three of you have in common with one another and with everyone in this room is your own personal narrative, how you got to where you are in terms of your perspective on God and religion. And Rabbi, I'd like to start with you if I could. If you all could do it fairly briefly, give a little bit of a story about your lives and how you got here. I think that would really help people to understand how you ended up where you are.
I grew up in a conventional middle-class Jewish household, taking religious involvement moderately seriously, more as a matter of community than as a matter of theology. And I still think religion is more about community than about theology. It's about who you belong to more than it's about what you believe. But I went to rabbinical school because I wanted to serve the Jewish people. Was given a conventional notion of how God works and what the world looks like. And that served me pretty well until the day the doctor told us that our 3-year-old son had a rare and incurable disease, which would leave him in physical and psychological pain every day in his life and cause his death in his early teens. And at that point, I had this shattering experience that everything I'd grown up believing was not true. I didn't know what to do. I went through a very difficult couple of months. I didn't want to be angry at God. I didn't want to live the rest of my life without God. But I didn't know if I could continue as a rabbi celebrating every Sabbath another family's child growing up and knowing that my son never would. The breakthrough came to me reading the book of Job and reading an essay that Archibald MacLeish wrote about his play J.B., the modern dress version of Job, in which he suggested essentially that God is not all-powerful and God is looking for our forgiveness for the unfairness of the world. And to me, that was an absolute revelation. Everything changed at that moment. I don't totally agree with what MacLeish was saying, but the idea that God is not in control of everything, that if I must choose between an all-powerful God who is not kind and fair, or else an awesomely powerful God who is kind and fair but not totally in control. I would rather worship God for his kindness than worship him for his power. Where did we ever get the idea that power is the most admirable attribute we can assign to God? And everything else that I've come to believe flowed out of that transformative experience.
There's still no real evidence here, just feelings and personal stories. Saying there's more to life doesn't prove anything supernatural. Neuroscience explains those experiences. Music, love, and awe activate specific parts of the brain tied to emotion and reward. You don't need God for that. Your brain is already wired for it. Even Hitchens points out the problem. These experiences are completely subjective. One person sees a sign and converts, another sees nothing. If truth depends on random personal moments, it's unreliable. Real truth should be consistent and testable. And then it gets worse. Religion doesn't just stay personal. It turns those private feelings into authority. People start believing they have the right to control others because of what they think God wants. That's where religion becomes dangerous.
Mr. Hitchens, I think some in the audience would be surprised to learn, because they haven't read your book, how deeply involved you've been in studying religion and your own experience with religion. Could you talk about that, please?
Yes, by all means, if I'm allowed to say again that I find I'm pushing at another open door. Now we have a rabbi who doesn't believe that God is all-powerful or omniscient or omnipresent. I mean, what next? I don't know. These are concessions. It normally takes me hours to wring from people. I can't get these guys into the ring. For me, it's a very simple.
If you'd like me to make life easier for you by staking out a ridiculous position.
I should probably tell that England was my country of birth, and in England, I don't know quite how to explain this. This really is like trying to explain the Trinity, but when Queen Elizabeth dies, her bat-eared, chinless son will at that moment become the head of the state, the head of the armed forces, and the head of the Church of England. And that's what you get for founding a dynasty on the family values of Henry VIII. One of the consequences of this is that the Protestant religion is compulsorily inculcated in English schools. You have to be taught it, and it has to be taught as if it was true. And so I'm quite familiar with the King James Bible.
Could you tell the story about the teacher when you were quite young?
Mrs. Watts, thank you, yes. The King James Bible, I'll just simply say, is the only book ever written by a committee that has any beauty to it. I think it's because the conclave of bishops who wrote it for the king was writing at just the point where Shakespeare was beginning to publish his plays, and the English language and vocabulary were multiplying and enriching themselves. It is a remarkable thing. The Church of England should now have dumped it in favor of some rubbishy Good News Bible. It's like the king who threw away a pearl richer than all his tribe. But that's how I was brought up, and I wouldn't be without the beauty of the liturgy of that and the Cranmer prayer book either. It'll be with me till my last hour. However, there came a moment when Mrs. Watts, my nature and scripture teacher, she doubled in these two roles, which she would take us on walks to point out the beauties of birds, trees, flowers, and all this, and then she'd do the search of the scriptures machine. She said to us one day, over-ambitiously, as I now think, "Well, children, notice how lovely the woods and the trees are today, and see how they're so beautifully done in shades of green. And green," she said, "is the color most restful to our eyes. And isn't it nice of God to have designed it that way, that he's put the vegetation to be adapted, to make it nicest for our eyes? After it could have been orange or purple or something that would be very clashing." And I thought, I was 10, I thought, this is bullshit. I didn't know anything about chlorophyll or photosynthesis or adaptation by natural selection or evolution by didn't know any of that at all. Neither did she. Neither at that point did anyone know much about DNA or these things. I just knew somehow, no, my beautiful blue eyes, the source of my sexual charisma, have adapted to the vegetation, not the other way around. I knew that. I knew it as if I'd been taught.
At 10, you knew.
I knew it as if I'd been taught it. So the idea that one has a duty to God, or that now the rabbi says God has maybe a duty to us, who owes whom the explanation, has always been to me very strictly a non-question. And its subject, theology, a non-subject. And I'm sorry that that's as far as I've been able to go.
Professor Gomes?
Well, one should not build a career on the inadequacy of one's instruction. And I do think that's... we have all had bad religious instruction. I had a Sunday school teacher who patted me on my head, and she said, we were reading about George Washington Carver, and she said, "Doesn't it please you, dear boy, to know that one of your people invented the peanut?" Now, I knew what she was trying to do. I knew what she was trying to say, but she was totally incompetent. And I'm happy to say that I have sat at the feet of wiser and better informed people over the years, and I'd like to think that the complexities of the queen of the sciences, theology, for better or worse, have become a little more available to me. But one of the problems with the theology has been theologians tend to speak only to each other. And the vast majority of the praying, thinking, working people know next to nothing about theology. I suspect this is a profoundly average audience here tonight of profoundly theologically ignorant people.
Ooh,
who know next to nothing about it.
I hope you remember I said I heard you were really smart.
I've met many cleverer people than Mrs. Watts since then. But I've never met anyone who's come up with a better argument than she has done. You either believe that God has a plan and you're part of it, or you don't. And her naive and simple way of putting it was as good as as well put, I mean to say, as I've heard it since. All else is commentary.
Well, in that respect, you're fortunate. You have something to remember. I would say that indeed, for most of us in the Christian tradition, we flatter ourselves that God does indeed have a plan. We may not quite yet know what it is. Revelation is the unfolding of this design and this plan in which we hope to have a part, or hope to play a part in some sense. And it would be nice to think that God knew what God was doing. It would be very nice to know that this is not all random chance and chaos. But I would say that one of the great religious problems is not that people are too religious and know too much about religion, but they don't know enough about it, and certainly don't know the ways of thinking that this rather complex human science has developed. Part of my job as a preacher and a teacher is to try to make some of that clear. Now, indeed, there's a lot of medieval nonsense, and there's a lot of contemporary nonsense, and it's our job to try to sort that out as best we can until somebody smarter than we comes along and says, ha, 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 this is the way, not that way. And that keeps going until we see fully, we see wholly. That's another reason I believe in God. I look forward to the day when it will all be clear. Somebody will have the answer. I can't wait.
First, God is all-powerful, then suddenly not. First, everything is part of a plan. Then it's unclear. Then it's something we hope makes sense later. That's not truth. That's constant adjustment to avoid being proven wrong. Hitchens' point about nature is backed by science. Plants are green because of chlorophyll absorbing light efficiently for photosynthesis, not because it was designed for human eyes. Evolution explains adaptation clearly. Humans adapted to the environment, not the other way around. This is basic biology.
Rabbi, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, it seems to me that we're falling into the almost unavoidable trap of speaking about God as if God were a person. is he or is he not a bearded old man who lives in the sky? To talk about what God knows, to talk about aspects of God. I go with the Jewish philosopher Maimonides, who says anytime you talk about God using human language, you're being metaphorical, you're being poetic. Something being pleasing in the sight of God doesn't imply that God really has eyes, that God really has hands. It's poetry. I'm struck by the fact that in the Hebrew Bible, the name of God is a verb and not a noun, as if to imply that theology is about what God does, not what God is. To talk about what God is or is not is presumptuous. To talk about what God does is a reflection of human experience.
Are we not, though, are we not risking the elision of a very simple distinction, which is between deism and theism? I mean, someone who says they believe in God may be a deist, who says that, well, it looks as if there could be a prime mover or some kind of designer. At least the coherence and rhythm of things can seem to call for this. And before Einstein and before Darwin, that was the default position of most intelligent people, as late as Thomas Jefferson. And why not? It makes a kind of sense. But to be a deist is one thing altogether. To be a theist, all your work, in other words, to be a religious person, all your work is still ahead of you once you've established there's a God. You've still got to prove this God cares about you, knows about you, is interested in who you sleep with and how, what you might eat and on what day, what side in a war he will take, whether he has a favorite tribe or a favorite species or a favorite cause. That's what it is to be religious. Now, I'm not going to let you off the hook about this. Belief in God is quite different from being religious.
Oh, but
and so, if I was to ask you, do you think that God has a special covenant with the Jewish people or not? You're not going to pretend I'm inventing some dumb question.
No, what I would say is, yes, if you acknowledge that that statement is poetry and not descriptive.
I think it's awful prose myself.
To say God cares, to say God knows, to say God takes sides.
God makes a special covenant with the Jewish people or he does not. Which?
Pardon me?
God makes a special covenant with one people, the Jewish people, or does not. What's poetic about this question? I don't know where you come out on it.
I'll tell you where I come out. That God's relationship to the Jewish people is not a theological statement, it's a historical fact. Unless you can tell me that somebody else, unless you can...
You have sources of information denied to everyone else here.
Try this one. Were the Psalms written by the Jewish people or by some other tribe? Were the prophets representative of come out of the Jewish people or someone else? Did the biblical tradition come out of the Jewish tradition? That's what I mean, that God has a special relationship with the Jewish people. He can have a special relationship with other people as well. But again, it is so tempting and it is so misleading to talk about God as if he were the president of the world who has certain policies and certain limitations and certain attributes.
I agree, it's absurd. I just don't think it's misleading if you are religious to say that such a person exists, has plans, gives orders, expects commandments to be followed. Or if you don't, you don't, and I'm welcome to the fold and so on. I mean, could I just ask, do you, sir, Professor, Reverend, do you think that God gave his only son for the redemption of the world?
I do.
Very good.
And I believe that we, who are Christians, believe that because we have no other way to explain our relationship to God, our relationship to one another, or our relationship to this person called Jesus Christ. There's no other way that makes sense. And religion, for most of us, is trying to make sense of that which is beyond sense. Not nonsense, but beyond sense.
Whereas Maimonides says that the claim of Jesus to be the Messiah is a deceitful and blasphemous lie, and fully justifies the sages ordering his crucifixion. I mean, just saying, I'm just trying to reduce the level of ecumenical piety in the room. These are major questions on which people have laid and lost their lives, and we, I think, should talk about them as if they are as serious and as divisive and elemental as they are, not as if it was competing versions of some kind of goodwill.
Professor Gomes?
I'm among the first who will acknowledge the divisive quality of religion, because we all slice reality quite differently from wherever our point of view is or whatever our interest is. And our traditions are at war with one another because of our desires to pay and play special claims in the world. That is not to diminish any of those traditions. It's to acknowledge that human beings, overwhelmed by conviction, are likely to do very nasty things to other people because they have, in most cases, forgotten the first principles of whatever religious tradition it is to which they are adhering.
Forgotten the first principles. I have to take you up on that, I'm sorry. His Holiness the Pope has this week rehabilitated into his church 4 formerly excommunicated bishops. I'm sure most people here know what I'm talking about, of a formerly heretical schismatic sect, one of whom denies that there was an attempted Judeocide or Holocaust in the 20th century, and adds that he thinks that the United States government is responsible for 9/11 and set it up as a provocation to allow itself to invade the Middle East. Right? Now, the reason the Pope is rehabilitating these people is because they are loyal to the first principles, not because they have betrayed them.
They're loyal to the Pope.
No, they're loyal to the first principles. The first principle is that everyone was present at Calvary. We are all guilty for the sufferings of Jesus. We were all there. Every time we sin or fall away, we increase the loneliness and the torment, and that the Jewish people, most specifically because they were witnesses to it, cannot be forgiven for the crime of deicide. That is the first principle. The Church had been moving away from this principle for, I think, largely political reasons. Now, because of its loyalty to the first principles, it is restoring into credit and union neo-fascist demagogues and crackpots. This is not a thing that a serious citizen can look at with indifference. This is happening in our communities before our very eyes. The spread and recrediting of disgusting ideas that a church should be expelling, not readmitting. Wouldn't you say so?
I want to shift gears.
All right, listen to this closely. They're shifting the definition of God right in front of you. When it gets challenged, suddenly God isn't a being anymore. It's poetry, a metaphor. But then, in the same breath, they go back to saying this God makes rules, forms special relationships, and expects obedience. You can't have it both ways. And notice something else. They admit they don't understand it. The Trinity doesn't make sense, the explanations don't hold up, but they choose to believe anyway. That's not evidence. That's commitment without proof. Then it turns into identity. It's not about truth anymore. It's about belonging. This is my tradition. This is my community. That explains why people stay, even when the ideas don't add up. If your belief depends on not questioning it too much and holding on to it because it feels meaningful, that's not a reliable way to understand reality.
I want to shift gears because I think the three of you really are sort of illustrating the reason I'm asking this question. Public perception, if I may be so bold as to suggest I may have some idea of what the public perception is of each of you. For the two of you, your lives are spent, even as you struggle with your own questions of faith, in ministering to the needs and the faith needs of others. And Mr. Hitchens, you are often, rightly or wrongly, depicted as basically the angry atheist. Well, you can see that. I mean, I'm not saying that's fair. So I would like each of you, please, to address that in terms of what is it like to be who you are today? And how accurate is the perception of you that you surely, each of you already gets an idea of what people think of you most of the time. What is that like?
I am not an angry atheist. I'm a simple pious Baptist. But I happen to be a university preacher in a place that is famous both for rational discourse and alleged indifference to religion, where people are very much concerned about religion. Instead of students coming to me and saying, we'll have no more of this nonsense, they come to me and many others and they say, if you have anything to tell us, for God's sake, as it were, please do. And I do. I do it every day. I do it every Sunday. I teach, I preach, I celebrate the sacraments, I pray with people. I see them out of this life. I see them at their high moments. I see them at their low moments. And they see me as a servant of this God whom I'm prepared to serve. And I accept, I understand that. Those were the terms of my ordination by which I accepted this identity as a Christian minister. And I rejoice in it. I mean, I don't do it because I think I have all the answers. I don't.
Has your confidence been relentless? Have you never had moments where...
Oh, I have doubts all the time. Moments of deep anxiety when something terrible happens, or somebody is taken before his or her time, or there is an irrationality about everything. Yes, of course I do. I'm a human being, and I'm tempted to also unchristian outbreaks of anger, violence, envy, lust, all of that. But the tradition provides a framework for me with which to deal with all of that. And that is what is so important about that tradition, as far as I'm concerned. And people see me, and I'd like to think they see me modeling and struggling as best I can within that. And when somebody says, well, how do you know? I say, well, I don't know. I believe, but I don't know. And the day will come, as Ba said of Tillich, when I will know. And I look forward to that day.
Rabbi?
It occurs to me that there is something strangely familiar about the way we're seated on the stage tonight, with Christopher Hitchens to my far left,
Easily pleased.
regarding me as a deluded fanatic who thinks that God will be angry at me if I eat a ham sandwich, and the chaplain of Harvard University to my right, looking at me compassionately and with forgiveness, but still seeing me as fallen away from the true faith. I have spent most of my life being regarded from both directions that way. It changed, I think, with the publication of my book, where people began to recognize me as a spokesman for religion as a source of compassion and resilience rather than a source of God's commandments and prohibitions. And frankly, Connie, I've become a lot more comfortable with that role.
Mr. Hitchens, what's it like to be you?
Well, I'm certainly not a therapist of any kind. And don't look for consolation where it isn't to be found. And though I do this quite to a considerable extent to please myself, one of the things I used to like about the early Christian church fathers was when they could never think of a good reason, a good description, I mean to say, of why heaven would be heavenly. They were very good at hell. They could make that seem very real. They could never quite do heaven. What are you going to do after the first 100 million years of unending praise, for example? For fun, I mean. But they did come up with something which was, well, you can always go to the lip and look down on the torments of the damned. And you'll never run out of the comfort and enjoyment when you see other people suffer. And I think that's it for me, actually.
Yeah.
What I like to do is increase the suffering of and taunt and jeer at the sufferings of others. When I get depressed, that's how I bring myself back up. So that's what it was until recently. It was a form of being religious. But now I've got another kind of cause imposed on me by my readers, which is this. Many people in this country think that to be a person of no faith is to be a member of a sort of despised minority. You're always left out. The politicians speak when invocations are given at inaugurations, for example, things like that. Where Billy Graham gets to give the address for the victims of 9/11 and says, I saw him say to the National Cathedral, they're all in heaven now, and they wouldn't come back to us even if they could. Who knew there were that many saints in New York, for one thing? And it's precisely the same promise as Osama bin Laden gives to his murderers. Believe with me, and you go to paradise, and you'll be fine. Nauseating garbage of this kind, right across the culture. I think there maybe even be a few people in the hall this evening who are with me in saying we've sort of had enough of that. We are not spoken for by religious big mouths, and we think we have the right to live where we do actually live, which is in a secular country with a democratic secular constitution and declaration that says you don't have to believe any of this, and the government may not support it by your tax dollars. And this is a struggle of great importance, both at home and against our theocratic enemies abroad. And that one of the pleasures now of secularism, quite apart from trying to increase the misery of the other team, is that you're helping to defend the United States Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Raise your hands, those who say aye. Good. Far too few. But it will improve.
They admit it openly. I don't know, I just believe. That's the foundation. Not evidence, not proof. Just belief. And then they say one day it'll all make sense later. That's not an answer. That's postponing the question. And notice the role religion plays here. It's not about truth, it's about comfort. People go to them at their lowest moments, and they provide a story that helps them cope. That explains why it survives. It feels good. It gives structure. But something feeling helpful doesn't make it true. Hitchens cuts through that with a harder point. These promises, heaven, paradise, eternal reward, are used everywhere, even by completely opposing groups. Same idea, different religion. That should raise a red flag. If the exact same promise can justify totally different beliefs, then the promise itself isn't reliable.
I'm wondering if, before I go to the final question before intermission, either of you would want to respond to the notion that, I think there are people of faith who also are sick of some of what you described coming from people who, you said the big mouths of faith.
Hope so.
So I'm wondering if either of you would want to respond to that as well, as men of faith.
I have never desired to speak for any religious community, and I have never desired to speak for any religious person other than myself. And I want the privilege to believe the absurd. I want the privilege to expect a great and glorious heaven. I want the privilege of being able to take the whole ball of orthodox wax to my bosom and not be thought of as ignorant or prejudicial or stupid or superstitious or any of those things. I actually, I've read my Augustine, and I've read the wonderful sort of self-indulgence where Augustine says, half the joy of the redeemed is being redeemed. The other half is watching those who aren't redeemed. Now that's quite perverse. And I don't want simply to enjoy the sight of the damned, sort of straggling around the edges. But I would like the privilege of embracing the hope that is within me, the tradition that is mine. And I'd like to be able to support and encourage all those others who might in some way, either more articulate or less articulate than mine, believe the same thing. Seems to be the great thing about this republic is that it permits, and it ought to permit all of it. It ought to commit itself to preserving the right of those who do not believe not to believe. And they ought not to be forced into any kind of sort of religious straitjacket. Yet on the other hand, it also ought to be in a position to affirm conviction on the part of those who have convictions to affirm. Seems to me that's the greatness of this republic, and I too would fight to preserve that.
Rabbi?
My abstract commitment to the principle of freedom of thought and tolerance is challenged by some of the really stupid things that are done in the name of religion. I cringe when I walk into a house of mourning and I hear somebody saying to the bereaved families, it was God's will, or they're in a better place, or I remember there was a 6-year-old boy who was run over by a truck, and the clergyman officiating his funeral said, this is not a day for sadness, this is a day for rejoicing that Billy has been taken into heaven with his soul still unstained by sin. I guess that means before he was old enough to be interested in girls. And, you know, I spent a lot of my energy trying to clean up the mess that these people left behind. And yet, even as I want them to give me the right to speak in the name of God as I understand God, I feel obliged to give them the right to articulate their views. And as long as all the competing views are heard, there will be some people who, for characterological reasons, need to believe the more fundamentalist perspective. And there are others who, when given a choice, will take the more liberal view. And I don't think I could ask for anything more than that.
For the final question, I want to borrow from your book, Mr. Hitchens. There was a question that I've really been thinking about a lot. Why doesn't our religious faith make us happy? And I'd like each of you to address that as our final question before we break for intermission.
Well, gee, Connie, my religious faith makes me very happy.
Makes me happy.
I mean, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, there are times where, you know, the Red Sox are playing a playoff game on Yom Kippur and I have to miss it. But otherwise, you know, if you take a sufficiently mature view of happiness, which is not defined as doing whatever you want whenever you want to do it, I find that religion is what makes me happy, is what endows my life with transcendent meaning, is a source of guidance, and I would be lost without it.
The term happy is often used in the black church to describe the ecstasis, that sort of hallelujah moment that most people observe and comment when they enjoy almost something to excess. You'll say, oh, Sister Brown's got happy. She's dancing in the aisle. You know, it's not because she's come to some incredible intellectual understanding that finally the chips have fallen into place. No, she's overwhelmed by some sense that she counts. She's noticed, she's seen, she's heard, she's felt. And the only way she responds to that is the way the Pentecostals do. I know lots of happy Christians. Now, when I go into mainline churches, some of which I could name right here, I look out at these rather grim people. They don't look very happy. They don't look very happy. I want to say, the Presbyterians need a good colonic. That's what they need. Something needs to loosen them up and give them a little sense of...
As someone who was raised Presbyterian, I got to say amen.
Don't you know what I'm talking about? I love the old gospel hymn that says, I am happy in the service of the King. Oh, so happy I am. There used to be categories in mainline Protestant hymn books called happiness. They're all gone now, but I mean, they used to be, they were sort of embarrassed about saying, you know, I love Jesus. Jesus loves me. He loves you too. I don't know why, but he does. And, there is a sort of emotional freedom which in our desire to understand and explain everything, I think we've lost. But I think the happiness is a fundamental ingredient of faith, not anger, not violence, not anxiety. But remember, the angels come and are always offering joy, which is related to happiness. I believe in happiness.
There was a reason you asked that question.
Well, yes, but I mean, now, come on.
I didn't mean it to...
I have here, if I was to ask him if he thought Calvin was a real influence, I think I know what kind of answer I'd get.
Calvin had a real problem.
And yes, if he's only a personal believer. And so, I mean, look, I think it is very ingenious. I'll have to give this to Christianity, that it manages to reconcile ecstatic shout and holler stuff with the idea of original ineffaceable sin and ineffaceable guilt. I think to be able to do that to be able to square that circle, is to show what promising primates perhaps we are. Always able to look on the bright side. But there's nothing to be happy about if you think that you're born into a losing struggle, that you were condemned before you were born by the original sin of Adam, that sin can only be expiated if you agree to have been present at a terrible human sacrifice by torture, that you can't rest until this has been done. I mean, if I was burdened with that kind of belief, I think I would every now and then burst out in great streams of babbling joy.
They admit people say harmful things in religion, telling grieving parents their child's death was part of a plan. That's not wisdom. That's a script people repeat because they don't have real answers. Then step back and look at the system itself. You're told you're flawed, you need saving, and the solution is to accept a specific story. That's not discovered truth. That's a closed loop. The belief creates the problem, then sells you the solution. And the happiness claim? It's inconsistent. Some say faith brings joy. Others admit doubt, guilt, and anxiety. If something were true in a clear, objective way, it wouldn't produce completely different outcomes depending on the person. So here's the real question. If belief isn't based on evidence, and different religions all claim different truths, how do you decide what's actually real? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you made it all the way to the end, we definitely missed Christopher Hitchens. It's always entertaining and educational hearing him debate. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more.